This will destabilize him, and this will promote the coup from within. It's wrong to say regime change early on, because the first Bush administration had no intention whatsoever of changing the regime. They wanted Baathists in control. They wanted a Sunni-dominated dictatorship in control because they recognized that there was no viable option to replace Saddam Hussein, that if you remove Saddam Hussein and the Ba'athist Party, Iraq will devolve into chaos and anarchy because regardless of the despicable nature of the regime, it represented the glue that held that country together. They didn't want regime change. They wanted name change. They simply wanted Saddam removed and replaced with somebody who looked like Saddam, talked like Saddam, behaved like Saddam, who wasn't named Saddam. This is why they put forward Resolution 687, which created the conditions to contain Iraq through the maintenance of economic sanctions. Sadly for the Bush administration, Saddam Hussein survived longer than 6 months, creating a problem for the president. What to do? They now lacked a policy to deal with Saddam Hussein. Well, they came up with a new policy in October of 1992 called regime change, authorized, but again, it's name change. It authorized the CIA. It was a lethal finding published by the president, secret document, covert policy. It authorized the CIA to use whatever means necessary, up to and including lethal force, to remove Saddam Hussein from power. October 1992, but they never had a chance to implement this because in November 1992, Bill Clinton wins the election. Now, the Clinton administration comes in, and from November 92 to January 93 puts out feelers to the Iraqi government saying that we believe we can find the conditions under which economic sanctions can be lifted. We need to work with the Iraqis. The Iraqis were gloating about this. I write this in my book about a meeting with, at that time, Amr Rashid, who wasn't quite the oil minister, but on his way to being an oil minister, saying all the problems are going to be resolved really soon. The Clinton administration is going to end this nightmare. The Bush administration was aware of the fact that Bill Clinton said, I'm a Southern Baptist who believes in deathbed conversions, and I think we can get Saddam Hussein to change his way. That's why on the same day that Bill Clinton took his oath of office, the United States was bombing Iraq. Now, how can you, as the new commander-in-chief, talk about lifting sanctions against a nation that you're actively engaged in military operations again? Well, he tried. And by the spring of 1993, he was getting ready to move forward, and then something else occurs. It's called the assassination attempt against George Herbert Walker Bush. He was supposed to visit Kuwait. There's now this attempt on his life, or this alleged attempt, because it's funny, when the FBI investigated, a couple things occurred. At that time, there was a prohibition against using testimony derived from torture. And when the Kuwaiti government presented the 6 defendants, they recanted their confessions and said it was done under torture and there was obvious signs of distress. So the FBI threw the confessions out, did a forensic investigation of the explosive material, only to find that, yes, it was Iraqi in origin, but it came to Kuwait in 1991 when Saddam Hussein occupied, or 1990, and it stayed in Kuwait when Saddam Hussein left in 1991, meaning it was under the control of the Kuwaiti government when the assassination attempt was supposed to occur. The beauty of this, though, isn't that this was a false allegation. It's that Clinton acted on it by sending cruise missiles into the intelligence headquarters, thereby confirming this not only in terms of, giving it the perception of reality, but politically as well. Now the president is tied to this policy, but he's not active on it. Yes, the CIA goes forward. They create this wonderful umbrella organization called the Iraqi National Congress, headed up by this great Iraqi politician named Ahmed Chalabi. But it doesn't do a very good job. It doesn't do a good job at all. The CIA is not fully funding it, not fully supporting it. In 1994, Bill Clinton's inability to deal with the continued rule of Saddam Hussein becomes a political liability. Political liability at home when Newt Gingrich and the Republicans sweep into the Congress using Clinton's inability to deal with Saddam Hussein as political ammunition on the domestic front. That's why in 1995, Bill Clinton tells the CIA, get rid of this man once and for all by the summer of 1996, so he's no longer a lead weight around my shoulders going into the 96 election. Bill Clinton was now fully committed to a policy of regime change, aka name change in Iraq, not because he was sympathetic to George Herbert Walker Bush, because he was trapped by domestic American politics.
I've just remembered what the bad reason was for not indicting Saddam Hussein, by the way, not bringing in a proper bill of indictment. It wasn't just a bad decision on its own, it was made for a bad reason. When most of the worst of his crimes were being committed, the invasion of Iran, the genocide in northern Iraq, and the abolition of Kuwait, at almost all of those material times, he was a semi-official ally of the British and American governments, and a trial would have enabled him to deploy the defense that they'd known at the time and they had no right to be surprised. So that's what we basically discovered when we pressed the British Attorney General for, on this point. I don't disagree very much with Mr. Ritter's condensed history of the evolution of Iraq policy. I think it stops short of a very important decision by the United States Senate to pass the Iraq Liberation Act, which was an open debate. Everyone knew what they were voting on and for. Every single senator voted for it. No senator voted against. It has been the policy of the United States since 1998 that the government of Saddam Hussein shall be removed. That was the right policy then. It's the right policy now, and it was democratically arrived at. I would further add that I feel no more bound in my own opinions on this by anything said by any of these presidents than I was when James Baker asked what his justification was this week for the first Gulf War, said after a very long and thoughtful and after a while agonizing pause, jobs. Now, I'm not bound by what he says, not bound by what Bush said, and certainly not bound by anything Clinton said. We have to figure this out for ourselves. This is a citizen's responsibility now. It's a matter of solidarity with the democratic forces in Iraq, and it's a matter of the possibility, the fighting chance, that a spring of democratization can be brought to the region, as well as that the non-proliferation success, which is one, whatever haphazard route we came to it by, Iraq is now certifiably disarmed, or weapons of mass destruction, can be extended. Colonel Gaddafi of Libya was induced to capitulate on this point and to place all his fissile and other suspicious material in our hands. They're all now under lock and key in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I think that's where they ought to be, just like I think the dock is where Saddam Hussein ought to be. Mr. Gaddafi did not capitulate to Kofi Annan or to Jacques Chirac, Saddam's pimp, or to Gerhard Schroeder, Saddam's bumboy.
Well,
he capitulated to Blair and to Bush. He said, I've had enough. We can't go on like this anymore. And by walking back that cat, ladies and gentlemen, finding where Libya got all this stuff, and it was always more than we'd thought, as it is with Iran, more than we'd suspected or alleged, as it is with North Korea, more, not less, than we suspected and alleged. They were able to identify its origin in the A.Q. Khan nukes our ass Walmart in Pakistan. And now A.Q. Khan is where he ought to be, which is under house arrest. This isn't perfect, but it is progress, and it is worth arguing about, and we have the responsibility for it. We are not spectators here. We're not onlookers. We're not consumers.
Christopher, and Scott might know more about this than I do. I remember, and I can't document what I read, but I remember reading a rather lengthy op-ed someplace, and maybe I'm hallucinating it, but the gist of it was that what happened with respect to Gaddafi yielding these weapons and storing them at Oak Ridge was the product of a very lengthy 10 or 12-year negotiation that also happened that was going on during the whole of the Clinton administration and which saw its culmination at that time about a year ago. Do I have this right?
No, you haven't hallucinated that at all. And it doesn't, I don't believe it contradicts what I say. I mean, I talked to the British ambassador in Tripoli, who's now in Iran, not long ago about this. He's free to talk about it. Was one of the chief negotiators. He said, look, there were three ways in which it happened. There was, for once, good intelligence. They knew so much about what Gaddafi was doing, so much about what he had, that when they went to him and said, look, what about this? He was appalled to discover that they'd got him cold. Then there's been a very long discussion about bringing Libya back into the tent after the Pan Am atrocity and the sanctions that were connected to that and the renormalization of relations with most European countries. That was contributory. And then he said, and then there's Iraq. He realized the game wasn't worth the candle. And he was impressed by the fact that there was a point beyond which the United States could no longer be bluffed or teased or bullied or just told to keep looking and we'll play hide and seek. And okay, it's over. We give up. But he gave up to, that's why I mentioned it, to Bush and to Blair, not to Blix or Annan or Chirac or Schroeder. And the stuff is in Oak Ridge, which is exactly where it ought to be. And we should be proud that that's the case. And all those who were involved in bringing out about the disarmament of Libya so peacefully have a right, I think, to some praise.
And I would give
them... They never get it.
I, for one, will give them praise for getting rid of Libya's weapons of mass destruction.